Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, December the 18th, 2023. Today I want to talk about the Winter Solstice, which is on Friday, London time. If you're in the Americas, it's actually on Thursday evening. So I want to consider what this solstice is about and sort of give a bit of a preview of it so that you can sort of think ahead to the end of a week. Think about what you might want to be doing on the solstice. Think about how this solstice might be impacting you. When you're talking about the solstice, there is a view that if you look at the precise time that the solstice happens, which London time is 3:27 a.m. on Friday morning, and you set up a chart for that precise time, you get an indication about what the next 3 months are going to be like. The next 3 months from December the 22nd through to the spring equinox at the end of March. So by looking at the solstice chart, might get an idea about what the first few months of 2024 are going to be like. So that is something I want to cover. I want to also look at it a little bit from a sort of a symbolic perspective and a mythological perspective. Robert Graves says quite a lot about the solstice. He says some very disturbing things about the solstice in his book, The White Goddess. Things one can't really go into great detail here about, because it's just nasty. But I'll be sort of alluding to that in this part of the video when I cover the solstice. But anyway, before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, December the 18th, 2023. There's a picture of the Earth. It's just a solstice picture. That is the midpoint for the there's a midpoint tree for the hypothetical planet Kronos. I'll be talking about that later. I think that has relevance to the solstice, but it doesn't have any particular relevance to today's astrology. So what's going on today? So here's a chart for Monday, and you can see that Mercury still going retrograde in Capricorn. Well, in fact, its retrograde movement has really only just started. So Mercury is at 5:45 Capricorn, but it is making a trine aspect to Jupiter at 5:51 Taurus. Now, I've already talked about this aspect. It's fortunate. Mercury and Jupiter together in a trine, in earth signs. It's about good communication, particularly about material subjects, money, career, business, that kind of thing. Reason being because Mercury and Jupiter are both in earth signs. So if you want to talk business today, it might be a good idea. If you want to discuss money, if you want to understand money, again, good thing to be doing today. But I would warn you about reaching any conclusions. Yes, there might be a lot of excitement with ideas really flowing quite freely with Mercury trine Jupiter. But we mustn't forget that Mercury is retrograde and Jupiter is retrograde. So you've got these two retrograde planets in trine to each other. So when you've got retrograde planets, there's still some details that are not clear. There's some brilliant ideas, but it's not the whole picture. So by all means, discuss what you're going to do next. By all means, talk about your plans for the future, but you must accept that you don't understand or get the whole picture. So decisions have have to wait until later. I mean, particularly big decisions. Okay, some decisions have to be made. I don't know, working out what you're going to buy someone for Christmas. You can't put that off until the new year. Well, I suppose you can, but it's probably not a good idea. Um, where you're going to have a Christmas meal or whatever. Again, that's something you really can't put off until the new year. But if it's sort of a more of a long-term plan of a business and a financial nature, I would leave it. Get all the ideas out, get excited about it, but yeah, leave the decisions till the beginning of next year. I would have said. Now, this Mercury-Jupiter trine may actually be quite good for relationships. And I know that with astrology, a lot of people, consult astrologers, look at star sign forecasts, whatever, because they're concerned about relationships. To be honest, it's something that relationships, going on and on about it, you cannot have romantic success every single week, day, whatever. There are only certain times in a lifetime when there are big events in terms of relationships, but all things being equal, Mercury and Jupiter could be good for relationships, especially for certain signs. This is because Mercury rules Gemini and Mercury rules Virgo. So Mercury has a special relationship with those two signs. Jupiter rules Pisces and Sagittarius. So when Mercury and Jupiter are in a trine, those four signs are strongly configured. So, let's say you're a Gemini. You're a Gemini here, and your opposite sign is Sagittarius. So Mercury, ruler of your star sign, is trine Jupiter, ruler of your opposite sign. Or let's say you're a Pisces. So there's Pisces. So Jupiter is your ruling planet, your solar ruling planet. So Mercury, Jupiter trine is going to impact you, because Virgo is the opposite sign to Pisces, and Mercury rules Virgo. So this Mercury-Jupiter trine could be good for relationships, particularly for those four signs. Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. But for everyone, regardless of what your sign is, the Mercury trine Jupiter should be good for relationships, because it's about good communication. You can't have any form of decent relationship without good communication. And Mercury trine Jupiter allows us to express ourselves in an intelligent way. As I said, it's particularly about material details. So this is, this is the most important aspect going on today, and it's strengthened by the fact that you can see that there's the moon in Pisces. So the moon is moving away from a trine to Mercury, but it's trine, sextile. Moon is separating from a sextile to Mercury, moving away from a sextile to Jupiter, but it still has a sort of sextile relationship between Mercury and Jupiter, two signs apart. And moon in Pisces, is quite an emotional planet. So when we communicate, we're able to understand the emotional environment. And I don't think we're going to cause too much upset with what we say, provided we're not completely crass, provided we make some effort to listen to our feelings. Now, as far as the midpoints are concerned, it's a slightly different picture. I've talked about relationships. I've said that for many signs, it could be a good day for relationships. But I need to put a caveat on that. And the problem is Saturn. Now there's Saturn, and so okay, there's Saturn. What's the problem with Saturn? The problem with Saturn is that Saturn is square the Venus-Mars midpoint. So you can see that the Venus-Mars midpoint is going to, there's Venus in Scorpio, Mars in Sagittarius. So the Venus-Mars midpoint is going to be in very early Sagittarius. And Saturn is on the Venus-Mars midpoint today, Monday. Now, Venus-Mars is about male and female. Venus is about, female sexuality. Mars is about male sexuality. Together, those two, the pair is about charisma. It's about sex appeal, that kind of thing. Key ingredients of a romantic relationship, perhaps. And so Saturn is square the Venus-Mars midpoint. So that suggests, concerns about intimacy, difficult to get really close to someone with that. And there might be a sudden charisma deficit with Saturn on the Venus-Mars midpoint. So if we're used to sort of really being able to project our attractiveness and charisma and getting people to love us and all of this kind of stuff, Saturn is going to put a damper on that. So in terms of relationships, that means, yes, I think it could be a good day for relationships. It should be a good day for relationships with Mercury trine Jupiter. But keep it light. Just remember that Saturn is hitting the Venus-Mars midpoint. It's not a time for deep commitments. It's not a time for relationships as in, heavy emotional intimacy, all that kind of stuff. No, try to keep it on a fairly, I won't say intellectual level, but you don't want to go too deep. It's a good time to just reinforcing relationships, but don't push your luck with Saturn square the Venus-Mars midpoint. There are two other midpoint configurations going on, both of them involving the hypothetical planet Hades. Hades is the planet of graveyards, death, garbage. It is difficult, and Uranus is semi-square the Sun Hades midpoint. This can be about not everyone getting on with each other. Some people might find other people somewhat repugnant and repugnant even. So that completely sort of contradicts what I've said a bit. So don't take this too seriously. But I think with the Saturn on, and it perhaps tells us more about the Saturn hitting the Venus-Mars midpoint, not everyone is going to seem attractive. Some people are going to be, I think Witter uses the word repugnant when he talks about this midpoint combination, Uranus semi-square the Sun Hades midpoint. Not everyone is going to be on our physical wavelength. So that's something one has to be aware of. It's also quite violent, Uranus semi-square the Sun Hades midpoint, especially as you also have the Aries is on the Mars Hades midpoint. It's opposition it. So the Aries point is opposition the Mars Hades midpoint. So Aries is a world at large. Mars Hades is about violence and death. So with Uranus on the Sun Hades midpoint at the same time as the Aries on the Mars Hades midpoint, there could be news of death on a large scale. It's one of those, those two combinations, which, is about war zones and whatever. Um, yeah, in terms of the news, those two midpoints involving Hades may be troublesome. I suspect in most cases they're not going to affect us on a personal level. Um, Particularly if you just do your normal life and you do your normal stuff and you don't go out of your way and you don't go, you don't hang out in dangerous and seedy neighborhoods, then probably you can avoid the negative impacts of those two midpoints. Okay, so that's my view of the day. I'm sorry to be a bit negative at the end, but I must emphasize that the most important aspect today is Mercury trine Jupiter. It's about good communications, and that's what we should focus on. And if you remember that, and you don't do anything dangerous, don't go off the beaten track, it should be overall a good day. Okay, so now I want to do my forecasts, my forecast for the 12 signs. So here we go. Here are my forecasts for today, which is Monday, December the 18th, 2023. Aries, just because you're not being noticed doesn't mean that you're doing nothing. Today, you can work behind the scenes, confident that you're on the right track. And if by any chance you have to discuss financial or career matters, you'll know exactly what to say. At the same time, you might have an inspiration about money and its effective management. Taurus, there are certainly things going on in your social life, and it's tempting to go with the flow. Yet you're thinking about what you're supposed to be doing, and perhaps you have a vision of the future that's been on ice for some time. And maybe what you have to do is revisit some of your ambitions and work out how best to put them on track. Or should I say, put them back on track. Gemini, on the surface, there's aggravation that you just don't want to bother with. But if you go out into the world with a positive attitude, then I think you can have a great day. Problems that you thought were insurmountable won't be so bad, and relationships of all kinds can exceed your expectations. Cancer, your emotions are finely tuned. After all, the moon is in Pisces, making a trine aspect to Venus in Scorpio. You understand what makes people tick, and you know how to make people feel good about themselves. Just make sure that the emotional environment doesn't overwhelm you. A bit of psychic self-defense may be required. Leo, it's a time of year when many Leos are feeling cosmic and out of this world. After all, the sun, your ruler, is moving onto the galactic center. I'll be talking about the galactic center more tomorrow. You can see the world in a new way and move outwards from the material to the spiritual. But on the way, you must consider the complexities of other people's lived experiences. Virgo, it looks like being a good day. Mercury, your ruler, is making a fantastic trine to Jupiter, the planet of good luck. Your star sign gets a full force, and things that used to be difficult will start becoming a lot easier. At the same time, relationships of all kinds should prosper, and you and someone else can form a powerful rapport. Libra, I suppose it all depends how much work you put in. If you do nothing and you expect the world to come to you, then it could be a frustrating time for you. On the other hand, if you make yourself busy across all areas of your life, you'll get good results, and you'll be helped by a natural sensitivity to other people's strengths and weaknesses. Scorpio. You're a fun person to have around, and I mean that without any irony. You lighten things up, and your sense of humour will be infectious. But what really stands out is your creativity and persistence. Yet you may have to be a bit careful with money. Perhaps you'll underestimate how much something costs. Sagittarius. Broadly speaking, it's a time when Sagittarians need to go back to basics. This means looking at the fundamentals of the issue and not flying off on wild fantasies. And today, a disciplined approach can be useful. You'll win people's confidence, and with Mercury aspecting Jupiter, financial opportunities may present themselves. Capricorn. You're very clear about who you are and what you expect. Indeed, the message is perfect, or at least almost perfect, and you don't have to worry about repeating yourself, because repetition will just provide extra emphasis, and that's a good thing. And because Mercury is in your star sign, aspecting Jupiter, you'll be able to project your message to a wider audience. Aquarius. The moon is well established in Pisces, and from an Aquarian perspective, this might have financial implications. There may be a sense of chaos, losing touch with income and expenditure. It's all a rush made worse by the seasonal distractions. You might then be advised to keep a record of your spending. Pisces. There's a lot going on around you, and your job is to understand and interpret it all. Indeed, you might have to explain to other people what's going on. After all, Mercury, the communication planet, is aspecting Jupiter, your solar ruler. The lines of communication are strong, and you and other people can bring new understanding to the situation. Okay, so those are the 12 signs, and I'm now going to look at what's happening today from the perspective of the I Ching. So with the I Ching, I always ask a question, and the question I'm asking is, what is Monday going to be like for those watching this video? And that's just a reminder, I'm not talking about everyone, the whole world. I mean, I can't possibly say what's going to happen in everyone in the whole world's life on the basis of an I Ching reading. But what I can do is I can narrow that down to people watching this video. And even then, there's a voluntary there's a voluntary aspect of that. It's only if you want to hear what I say. So if you don't want me to talk about your I Ching, if you don't want me to use the I Ching to make a prognostication for you, what you can do is you can skip. You can skip to the next chapter. Skip on when I talk about the solstice. So if you don't want to hear what I have to say about your about today from an I Ching perspective, just do skip this chapter. Okay, so let's look at the first hexagram I threw. The first hexagram is, don't panic, it is hexagram 29, the abysmal. I know that sounds bad, doesn't it? You have got, if you look at this, the structure of this hexagram, remember a hexagram has 6 lines, and it's composed of 2 trigrams, two lots of 3 lines, and you can see the trigrams repeat. Those 2 trigrams each represent water, so it's water over water, and so we get the image of the abyss. It's about a dangerous situation. If we're not careful, we are going to fall into the abyss. Now, that doesn't mean to say we will fall into the abyss. We probably won't. We just have to be careful. There's danger, all around us, especially at the beginning of the day. And we do have 2 moving lines. We have the third line moves, and the third line from the bottom moves, and the 5th line from the bottom moves. So the third line in a hexagram is very often unfortunate. It's difficult, and it's certainly difficult. And it does suggest that at the beginning, we're in a situation where we are surrounded by danger. And, I suppose when we're in a difficult situation, the temptation is to just rush on and get the whole thing over with, just move out. But that's not something we can do. We have to be very careful. If we move this way, that way, whatever, we could step into something. We could fall in the pit. So we have to take it really easily. Don't be impatient. It's going to take some time to resolve the various problems around you. I don't know what it is. It depends what you're dealing with, doesn't it? I assume that I assume that you're not going to be sweeping from mines at the bottom of your garden, and you found a mine and you're wondering how to defuse the mine. I'm assuming it's not going to be that kind of situation. Something a bit more mundane. But whatever it is, it may be dealing with people who are difficult to deal with. It may be a financial issue. It may be a piece of machinery in your home that is broken or isn't working. Whatever it is, be careful, and don't don't rush into it. Work out what needs to be done. Read the instruction manuals. Get in an expert. Get advice. Don't be impatient. So that's the first thing that's going to happen. And then after a while, the fifth line moves, and the fifth line moves is actually a much more fortunate line, and this is about certainly being aware of the danger, being aware that things can go wrong. But the advice here is to follow gravity. Water has its own way of moving. If we follow that movement, if we're dealing with people, understand how those people work. Just follow the movement of that other person's personality. Let water do its natural thing. And if we just allow things to naturally sort themselves out without forcing it, then slowly we will be able to get ourselves out of the danger, and we won't fall in the pit. And that leads to a second hexagram, which is much better. It's hexagram 46, which is pushing upwards. So it seems that after a bit of an issue at the beginning of the day, there are going to be some problems shown by the abysmal, a lot of danger. But once we get out of that, things start moving. We can start making progress. We can sort of look forward rather than looking down at what we might be about to step in. And there can be real progress. I mean, it's not just, okay, I'm not saying you're going to get necessarily results, but you're going to be moving towards those results. People are going to start taking notice of you. It'll be easier to make contact with people. Remember, at the beginning of this video, I talked about the fact that there's a Mercury-Jupiter trine, and that Mercury-Jupiter trine allows us to make progress, allows us to communicate well, understand what's going on, and perhaps we can impress the people that needs to be impressed. So overall, looking at the I Ching, I think the day starts on quite a difficult note. But once we've got over the crisis, it should improve, and it actually should end pretty well. Okay, so that's the I Ching, and I now want to look at the solstice. Okay, so the solstice. So this is the chart of the solstice. This is the exact moment that the sun goes into Capricorn at London time 3:27 a.m. Now, if you're in New York, that's 3:27 a.m. on Friday the 22nd. Now, if you are in New York, the solstice happens at 10:27 p.m. on Thursday. If you're in Los Angeles, it happens at 7:27 p.m. on Thursday. If you're in Paris, Berlin, Rome, then the solstice will happen at 4:27 a.m. on Thursday. If you're in Manila, for example, in the Philippines, London is at 3:27 a.m. on Friday. If you're in Manila in the Philippines, it would be 11:27 a.m. on Friday. And if you're in Sydney, Australia, it's at 2:27 p.m. on Friday. So the moment when one celebrates the solstice, it does depend where you are. If you're somewhere else and you want to know what time the solstice is, just you can ask in a comment. You can comment at the bottom of the video, and I'll tell you. So, what is the solstice? What is the solstice all about? The solstice, from an astronomical point of view, is where the sun reaches its maximum declination south below the celestial equator. That's when the southern hemisphere gets the most sunlight, and where the northern hemisphere gets the least sunlight. And so from a perspective of the northern hemisphere, the day of the solstice is the shortest day. If you're in the southern hemisphere, it's the longest day. That the actual moment of the solstice is, of course, the moment that is, if you're into sort of magic, the occult, all that kind of stuff, the moment is important. And as I keep saying, when dealing with moments, there are certain key moments in astrology. You can't just do it vaguely. You can't just think you celebrate a solstice party roughly on some convenient time on the 22nd, Friday the 22nd. No, it doesn't. It's not like that. It's got to be the precise moment, because at the precise moment, that is when, as I keep saying, that's when the gateway open. That's when the gateway is open. There's a split second when that gateway is open, and you have to be aware. You have to be around, focusing on the solstice when that gateway is open. And if you're in London, that is 3:27 a.m. So you've got to, if you're into magic and ritual and whatever, you've got to be awake. Otherwise, you miss the moment. If you're in Paris, okay, you don't have to get up quite so early. You have to get up at 4:27 a.m. If you're in Sydney, Australia, it's not a problem. This year, it's not a problem because it's at 2:27 p.m. in the middle of the afternoon. If you're in the Americas, also not a problem because it's nice evening time. New York, 10:27 p.m. That's not too late. So that is the moment when the if you like, the spiritual and the material are one. When the sort of the energies of the cosmos flood down here on Earth, and that's perhaps why it's important to look at a solstice chart. This chart is for the moment. It is showing us what kind of sort of energies are imprinting themselves on the Earth right now. And so that's why one would look at the solstice chart, the exact moment of the solstice. We also need to think about the solstice from a mythological perspective. I'm sure you've heard the view that the solstice was a traditional pagan festival that, for example, Christianity used. The traditional birthday of Jesus Christ is the 25th of December, which is obviously 4 days after the solstice, and so you could argue that is Christians using the pagan calendar to help spread their religion. I'm not sure if that's true or not. But the Christian, the Christ myth. I don't mean the Christ myth. I think Christ did exist, but I don't mean the myth. But the idea of Christmas, December the 25th, is the beginning. That is when the Saviour was born. The King was born at the end of December, close to the time of the winter solstice, and that links with sort of the Celtic tradition, at least the Celtic tradition as described by Robert Graves in The White Goddess. And Robert Graves, he describes how at the winter solstice you have the new king. The king, ascends to the throne, and he associates. I think he associates the new king with Hercules and the mythology around Hercules. And you have a new king, and you don't just have a new king. You have a deputy king called the Tanist. I think the deputy prime minister in Ireland is called something like Tanist or something like that. But anyway, he has a deputy. He has a deputy, and so that's the king. And then he reigns for 6 months. He takes to the throne at the winter solstice, and he reigns until the summer solstice. And at the summer solstice, he's killed. And Robert Graves describes how he's killed, and it is absolutely horrendous. I mean, he's skinned, he's blinded, he's ripped to shreds. It's quite, it's fairly horrific. And I'm not going to read what Robert Graves says about it. But describe, it's bad. And so the king, after 6 months, gets destroyed, gets ripped to shreds. And why? Because it's to it's a ritual sacrifice that happens at the summer solstice. To improve the land. If you've seen that film, The Wicker Man, it's that kind of idea that you need a sacrifice. If the crops are failing, you need a sacrifice. And so that's what happens to the king. He only rules, for 6 months. And then at 6 months, his deputy takes his place. The Tanist takes his place. And the Tanist rules for another 6 months until the winter solstice. And of course, at the winter solstice, the Tanist meets a similar fate. And so from a Celtic point of view, it would be now when the Tanist was being ripped to shreds and the new king would be emerging. And of course, from a Christian perspective, Christ is the new king, born around the time of a winter solstice. And of course, eventually he's crucified and everything else, and there's a sort of similarity there. So that's the idea. That's a very violent idea behind the solstices, which we should perhaps be aware of. There's always a darkness there, isn't there? Now, as far as this chart is concerned, again, 3:27 a.m., and I've set this for Westminster, England. In many respects, it's not so bad, this solstice. I know that, when I've recently looked at sort of new moons and full moons, I've tended to be quite sort of negative. But there's some good stuff going on here. I mean, look, there's the sun at 0 degrees Capricorn, and at the exact moment of the solstice, the moon is at 0 degrees 21 Taurus. There is a sun-moon trine at the moment of the solstice, and the moon is in Taurus. The moon is in the sign of its exaltation. It's indeed in Western astrology. Its maximum exaltation is 3 degrees Taurus. In fact, it's also maximum exaltation in Vedic astrology. So 3 degrees Taurus, it's very close to 3 degrees Taurus. It's trine the sun. So things are made even better by the fact that the moon, having made the trine to the sun, is making a conjunction to Jupiter. So the moon is in a really great position. Okay, you can see that the moon, it makes a sextile to Saturn, then it makes a trine, it makes a conjunction to Jupiter. So I know that a lot of us are feeling very pessimistic about 2024. The world seems to be falling apart. People are talking about recession, Ukraine, Gaza, all of this. But, for many of us, I think it's going to be a good year. A good 3 months ahead. I think the first 3 months of 2024 may actually be quite good. I think, if we see the solstice as a new beginning, if we start to use the energies of the solstice in the right way, new beginning, moon sextile Saturn, the moon is making a conjunction to Jupiter. I think it could be really fortunate. So if you've got plans that you want to put into action, then maybe not on the solstice itself, but shortly after the solstice, when Mercury turns direct, this would be a great time to put these plans into action. And at the time of the solstice, it's a time to dedicate yourself to, or we can dedicate ourselves to what we want to do in the next three months. And I know that I'm not really into positive thinking, and I'm not that kind of person. I tend to have a negative view of the world, but in this case, I think we can be positive. I know that there are problems with the economy. I know that there are issues, there are wars and whatever, but on an individual level, if we can use this solstice to really decide what we want to achieve over the next 3 months, what we want to do in our lives in the next 3 months with this moon conjunct Jupiter, moon in Taurus, I think it can really happen. That's the first 3 months. I'm not saying that things are going to be fine after the spring equinox, which is at the end of March. But we're talking about the first 3 months of the beginning of the year. And I do think that does look good. Now, I'm not saying that it's all wonderful. For one thing, the moon, it may be at 0 degrees Taurus, but it is square Pluto. And that's a reminder that Pluto is going to go into Aquarius pretty soon. I think the end of next month, end of January. And that is going to be a big change. Also, Mercury. The solstice happens at a time when, the sun is, by definition, is at 0 Capricorn, but Mercury is at 132 Capricorn. Mercury is really close to the sun. So yes, the moon is applying to a trine of Mercury. That's good. And to an extent, I think that's a good thing, because the moon is almost rescuing Mercury from the sun, because sun conjunct Mercury, all things being equal, is not great. It can be about having ideas which are just completely wrecked by our lack of we're just distracted, we're overwhelmed by what's going on. The sun conjunct Mercury. The sun represents light, too much light. We're blinded. And so that's Mercury being blinded by the sun. So we need to use the fact that the moon is trine Mercury. So if we're making decisions, if we're making plans, don't overthink it. It's not about thinking it. It's about almost about touching it. Because the moon in Taurus is very sensual. We have to focus. We have to focus on where the Earth wants to take us. We all have our individual path, but just be very grounded with moon in Taurus. It's perhaps not a time. It's not a time for crazy ideas. It's about Taurus. It's about grounding ourselves. So when to get into further detail about this, the next 3 months, yes, I think it can be good. But what we're trying to do is not just make things wonderful for ourselves, but what we're trying to do is actually ground ourselves, and that's something we can do over the next 3 months. Just think about that, because if we ground ourselves, then we are well prepared. I'm not saying that after the spring equinox in 3 months' time, things could start getting difficult again. But I think that perhaps over the next 3 months, it's a great opportunity to create protection, grounding, so that if things do go wrong later in the year, we'll be safe. So perhaps that's what we should be thinking about doing in terms of the solstice. Now I have this midpoint tree up here, and it relates to a hypothetical planet. The hypothetical planet Kronos. And now Kronos is pretty similar to Saturn, but is more specific than Saturn. So Kronos, is the Greek for the god Saturn, Kronos. And Kronos is, of course, also the Greek for time. And in Vitter's scheme, the Uranian school of astrology, Kronos is like Saturn, but it's more specific. It's about government, and it's about authority. And you can see here, if you look at this midpoint tree, you can see that Kronos is on the Sun-Moon midpoint, and Kronos represents government. And so, although this solstice is, I think, is going to be fortunate for many of us, government is not going away. Kronos is on the Sun-Pluto midpoint. Sun-Pluto is about trying to exert power. Governments trying to exert power. Governments trying to take control. Now, and I think this kind of may link back to what I was talking about with the solstice and the king being torn to shreds every 6 months. In a way, that's kind of rather like the election cycle, isn't it? You have a government, it's elected, the new government, and then there has to be an election, and it gets torn to shreds. So you could say you know, in Britain, you've got the Conservative government. It's been in power for a long time. It's totally unpopular. It's about to be torn to shreds. You've got in the US, Biden's got an election coming up. And so governments are kind of very aware of this, particularly the US government, because they've got this election coming up, and you know they're trying to avoid this process of being torn to shreds by the people, maybe, or whatever. And so Kronos on the Sun Moon midpoint with the solstice. It's like governments are kind of aware that their time is limited, and they're doing everything they can to stay in power. And so, you know, hence Kronos on the Sun Moon midpoint, Kronos on the Sun Pluto midpoint, and governments will be doing everything to maintain their power to avoid the people ripping them to shreds. And so over the next few months, I think we have to be very aware of this. Look how governments are behaving. Look what they're prepared to do to stay in power. They will do anything, and it doesn't matter how many people get killed, destroyed, whatever. They will do whatever it takes. So that is how I see Kronos perhaps working out in terms of this, in terms of the solstice. Will they succeed? I don't know. Will it affect you? Will it affect you personally? Probably not. If you just get on with your life, if you work on creating security for yourself, then I think you can be extremely successful. After all, Moon is trine Sun. It's going to it trines Mercury, sextiles Saturn, moves to a conjunction of Jupiter. If we really dedicate ourselves at the time of the solstice to making ourselves secure, able to deal with whatever happens to the world, I think we should be fine. But we do need to watch governments, because governments are trying to avoid being torn to shreds by the mob. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about the solstice. I hope you found that interesting. If you like this video, then click the like button. If you're not subscribed and you like the video, then do feel free to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. Anyway, thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.